Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our 12th session of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. And we're coming to a really an interesting chapter, chapter 7. It's a chapter that incorporates some verses that have kind of really seeped deeply into our collective Jewish soul and tradition, and has some really powerful ideas in it. And Kohelet, we found maybe over the last few chapters has veered into pretty dark places. In his vision of life and what life is about, and the futility of life and of almost everything. And we've tried to counterbalance that by saying, well, is he leading us to the very to the edge of looking at our lives in a very, very stark way to see, well, what is actually underneath all of it? What is underneath? What is truly of meaning in our lives? What is truly of meaning? And by taking us deeply into showing us how so many things really are temporary or empty, it really forces our minds and our hearts and our souls to really ask, okay, well, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? And he is a wonderful teacher, because he is traditionally King Solomon, who experienced everything, and so he knows he's imbibed it all and can really show us what those roads that we all feel tempted to go down, but many of us can't. But he's been down them, and he says, don't go down them. Those are not worthwhile. Don't even consider it. And so an interesting teacher for us, and at times dark. He does bring a darkness to it, but he also brings a clarity, which is powerful. So we are going to begin. We'll turn to Ecclesiastes 7. I'm just going to put up on my screen, where we can just read it together on the screen. And let us begin. So Diane, everybody is free to jump in and make a comment whenever they'd like. We have a long-standing tradition that goes back to Mount Sinai to have Alan Perez begin reading for us, but then anybody else can step in. All right. Share a screen.
I can't promise you'll feel the ground shake and the sky rumble.
And Godspeed.
Okay. A good name is better than fragrant oil, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, for that is the end of every man, and a living one should take it to heart. Vexation is better than revelry, for though the face be sad, the heart may be glad. Wise men are drawn to a house of mourning, and fools to a house of merrymaking. It is better to listen to a wise man's reproof than to listen to the praise of fools. For the levity of the fool is like the crackling of nettles under a kettle, but that too is illusory. For cheating may rob the wise man of reason and destroy the prudence of the cautious. The end of a matter is better than the beginning of it. Better a patient spirit than a haughty spirit. Don't let your spirit be quickly vexed, for vexation abides in the breasts of fools. Don't say, how has it happened that former times were better than these? For it is not wise of you to ask that question. Wisdom is as good as a patrimony, and even better for those who behold the sun.
So let's do one more. Let's do one more verse, and then we'll go back to the beginning and really go into it.
In the shelter of wisdom, is to be also in the shelter of money. And the advantage of intelligence is that wisdom preserves the life of him who possesses it.
Okay, thank you. So serious verses, but even though I think at first reading they feel heavy, if we go into them, we'll see that they are heavy, but they're also they reveal something. And it's not, we don't have to not enjoy reading these and have a smile on our face as we do it. But as it's talking about, don't go to a house of merrymaking. I think there's a big difference between frivolous merrymaking and the simcha, the joy of just life. So anyway, let's begin. A good name is better than fragrant oil. Have you heard that one before?
No.
It's and the day of death. So good, what does it mean? A good name is better than fragrant oil. I will often quote that at a funeral, right? That's a good place to quote that verse. What does it mean? Go ahead.
Sorry. I mean, to me, it means if you have a good name, it will last a long time. It will last forever.
Right.
Fragrant oil, it'll be fragrant for a little while, but then it'll dissipate, and then you'll just feel oily.
But actually, Rashi says that a good name is kind of like oil, because oil you can't mix oil in, right? It eventually separates. So a good name, once you have a good name, then that that good name will stick. It will stick, it will have the same constituents, even if it's others try to mix it in with something else, it won't. It will rise to the top.
But aren't fragrant oils at the time of this writing also used to not just for beauty purposes, but aren't they also used for dead bodies, for corpses, to dress dead bodies?
Interesting. Well, maybe I'm not sure if the fragrant, maybe with the comment, I thought you were going to go somewhere else with the commentator to say what is oil used for often, and right up until fairly modern times, to anoint kings and queens, right? You pour oil on their heads. Right? Even I think the Queen of England, right? She had oil poured on her head, and there's a sense that, I mean, that's quite a status, right? To be a queen or a king. And one of our commentators says this, Ibn Ezra, I believe, but a good name is better even in that.
And the Greeks anoint babies. I went to a baby naming in a Greek church, my daughter-in-law's cousin, and they anoint the baby with oil. In fact, they dip the baby in oil.
Wow. Well, it's probably for a similar reason. It's an anointing, right? There's an anointing.
Right.
I mean, the word for Messiah in Hebrew, Mashiach, means the anointed one, right? It's the anointed one. It's all connected. Maybe that's where the Christian tradition also takes that from. But right, it's saying good name is a good thing, right? This is what it's saying. To have a good name is a good thing, right? To have a name that is accepted and raised up, and that's developed over a lifetime. And at least the least I read here, the day of death better than the day of birth. I don't think it's saying, in my mind, he's not saying it's better to be dead than to be alive. What he's saying is at the end of your life is when your good name has come to its completion, and then that good name sticks, so to speak. And I mean, maybe on some level it's good. I wouldn't say it's good to be dead, but it's good to die with a good name. Maybe that's part of it. If you're thinking about also what's a good life worth living, if you die with a good name, it means you probably lived in a good way too. It means when you've passed away and people give a eulogy for you, there's a lot that's where it all kind of comes together on some level. And anybody else, what this verse does for you?
Yes, and good morning. I really don't find myself in agreement. I know it's a traditional understanding that the day of death is better merely because you know where you stand, or the world knows where you stand, but because I think his view is darker than that. I see there's some support for my sense of it in Alter and I think elsewhere, because life is such a hard and difficult thing, and there's something about leaving it that it's been a miserable thing and you're done with it, which is very negative. But I think that can be found in that text. I'd rather find something brighter, but he seems like a tougher minded person than that. That's
Thank you, and I think it could very well be the pshat, the simple meaning of the verse could very well be that, you know, you work your whole life to get a good name, and then okay, thank God I can go on to whatever is next. I don't know. That's a dark reading, but it may be where he's going with it. And I mean, one of the ways that this has been seen is that, right, what is oil symbolic of too? It's fragrant oil, or shemen, this oil tov, good oil. I mean, this isn't just any oil. This is the oil that only wealthy people can, shemen tov, that only wealthy people can find, can acquire. So it's saying, you know, your good name is worth more than your bank account on some level, right? When you come to the last day of your life, your bank account isn't what you take with you or what's left in the world. And you know, your bank account can quickly, once all your children fight over it, and then your bank account is not what it was, and all, you know, but your good name is something that lasts, and your good name, your legacy, what you've taught, the spirit you have, the goodness you've embodied, and your quality as a human being, your morals, your ethics, all those things are which is what is a good name? A good name is a person who's lived an ethical and moral life, and that's a good name. It doesn't say a person of powerful standing. It says a good name, right? It doesn't matter what you've accomplished necessarily, but maybe it's your moral and ethical character, and that's more important than your bank account. That's more important than your shemen tov, than your good oil. And that's a really beautiful. I think that's a really powerful and beautiful lesson, and one that's true, right? The one you can't take your bank account with you wherever you go next. That's for sure. And you might only realize that on the day of your death. The story I've mentioned before, right? What happens to you after you pass away? The story of the shopkeeper who's on his deathbed, and you know he's there and he's at the end, and he can't quite see, and he asks, you know, his wife, "Who's here with us? Is their oldest son Abraham? Is he here with us?" And she says, "Yes. Don't worry, Abraham is here with us. You know, just be comfortable and try and think positive thoughts." And then he says, "Okay." And then he says, "Well, is Yitzchak here too?" And she says, "Yes. Yitzchak is here too. Don't worry, Yitzchak is here. You know, just try and be at peace." And he says, "Well, is Yankele here?" She says, "Yes, Yankele is here too." He says, "Well, who's minding the shop then?" And then he passes away. You know, and so it's like, where's your mind? You know, there at a certain point, don't put your mind on the fragrant oil. Put your mind on the good, on the tov. And so, just to point out, already in this first verse, we have tov twice. It's a beautiful verse in the Hebrew, right? Tov shem mishemen tov, right? So you see. Shem and Shemen are two words that obviously sound very similar, right? Shem is name and Shemen is oil, obviously why I was picked. So Tov Shem Mishemen Tov. Just a great, beautiful Hebrew, one of the great ones, great sentences because of the way it's constructed. But Tov is one of the words that comes a lot, right? What is good? That's a big question of Kohelet. What is good in life? Well, we know good name is good, according to, it's better than good oil. But of course, tov takes us back to creation, and God looked at the world and thought it was tov, it was good. So tov is has a lot of shades and meaning in our tradition. And it's what we're trying to look at, and look at verses 2 and 3 also start with tov, and 5. So tov is what we're looking at. What is good? What is good? What is our life focused on? That's the subject, the object of our meditation. All right, let's look at verse 2. Would somebody like to read first verses 2 and 3 and 4, because they're all connected?
It's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, for that is the end of every man, and a living one should take it to heart. Vexation is better than revelry, for though the face be sad, the heart may be glad. Wise men are drawn to a house of mourning, and fools to a house of merrymaking.
Strong statement. But what's he saying?
Well, we're all going to end up dead.
Yeah.
But also, it's better to go to a house of mourning. I mean, that's a mitzvah. That's a good thing to do.
Okay, beautiful. And also, it's translated here as a house of feasting, but really it's a beit mishteh, a house of drinking. Is what it's kind of what the actual translation is saying. Not that it's horrible to go to to have a drink every now and then. We obviously, Jewish people, there's a place in the Talmud where it says that there's no joy without wine. So our tradition is not saying but it's saying something about not to be frivolous, right? That's my message. I don't know anybody else take don't be frivolous about life. Life.
But also, when this was written, feasting was not like the kind of feasting we do today. I mean, you think of a food orgy.
Yes, yeah. Especially a king, right? A king in those days.
Right.
Kind of feasting. Go ahead.
And I get the sense it's better to think about your life, that when you go to a house in mourning, you go for the person that's died, but you also examine your life. And it's better to be mindful.
It leads you to deep thoughts, right? It leads you to deep thoughts and it's a powerful thing to go to often parents will take a child to a shiva house, well, sometimes just to experience it at some point, because or a funeral, you should experience this, right?
What strikes me is there's a psalm, and I can't tell you which one, but it's been in my head a lot lately, and it's Lord, let me know the end of my days, that I may gain wisdom, or something like that. And the older I get, the more that's happening to me more and more, because I think as we get older, we realize the end of our life is near, and we don't have all this time to play around and that sort of thing. And I think we gain wisdom as we get older, and that's in my head. That's how I'm relating to these.
Beautiful. I think very, very, very connected to this. And right, this verse 2 says, better to go to the house of mourning than the house of drinking or feasting, for that is the sof of kol of the end of all men, which is similar to what that psalm you were thinking of is saying, right? The end. What is the end of a person, or the end of one's days? And then I love this last few words. And the living one should take it to heart. You should, while you're living, you should take it to heart, what this is all about. Not wait to the very last day, but to think about it, while you're around in this world. Think about what this is all about. And it's a beautiful, to take it to heart is a beautiful expression, right? Because putting it on your heart, or bringing your heart into it.
The opposite view is actually later on with Spinoza, who had his psychology was based on sorrow and joy. And joy, in fact, enhanced thought, enhanced closeness to God, and sorrow diminished thought and diminished closeness of God. So Spinoza would be on the other side of this, probably thinking that Solomon's into the spirit of seriousness and sorrow, which takes him farther away from the divine.
Well, there's right, Kohelet, there's a season for every, there's a time for every season, and maybe there is a time for planting, and there's a time for seriousness, and a time for joy. And I would like to think, obviously Kohelet does appear to be quite a serious man, but Kohelet, he's saying about the frivolous kind. He's talking about fools here. And I don't think he's talking about a wedding. It's good to go to a wedding. It's good to experience joy. It's good to, Rabbi Nachman says, it's a great mitzvah to always be joyful. But it's a different kind of joy. It's not a frivolous joy. It's not a silly, nothing, I don't think silly is fine, but I think it's not a foolish joy. It's a joy that's deep. It's Jewish joy is a very deep joy. We've experienced it all, and if we still remain to be happy, it's not foolish. It's because we see the seriousness of life, and so we have, both are true. We have this part of our tradition. It's called Koved Rosh. Koved means both to be honor, but also to be heavy-headed, or it means to be serious. Not to always be serious, but at the end of a wedding, we break a glass, right? And where does that tradition to break a glass at a wedding come from? In this Talmud, it tells a story of a rabbi who was at a wedding, and there was just like total kind of like, at least in his mind, letting go. And he took a glass and he smashed it on the ground. And people said, "Hey, what did you do that for?" And he said, "Well, because the temple is still destroyed, and the world is still a broken place. So we don't want to live. We don't want the whole wedding to be like that, but to have a moment at a wedding where we realize that seriousness, and that seriousness is not meant to just be a downer. It's not meant to just be a downer. It's meant to remind us, okay, well, you're getting married, because part of being married is to make the world a better place, right? And part of, you're not to bring you down, or like, oh, hey, the world is broken, but to say, hey, we're getting married because part of the partnership of being married is to make the world a better place. And part of being alive is not just to being, frivolously, to just spend our whole time in the Beit Mishteh, but to go around and try and make the world a better place, and do what we can in our limited way to bring healing and joy to it. And that's important. That obviously our history has led us to be serious about those kinds of things. And not only ours, other people have experienced it too. It's kind of like, once you've been in the world a long time as a people, maybe as individuals too, it leads you to that. It's kind of like the different, if you win the lottery, the first you see people win the lottery, what do they do for the beginning? They just go out and they buy beautiful cars and have beautiful things, but that doesn't last too long. After a while, they're like, okay, now what am I going to do with all this, because it's not bringing me joy?
With vexation, are we looking at it at the biblical definition or today's? Today's is just annoyed, whereas in the biblical I just looked it up. The biblical definition is questioning your faith.
Huh.
So for questioning our faith is better than to be, that makes sense, better than to be fooling around.
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing that up. I think that really opens that up, because it's a hard verse, and the simple meaning is not even vexation, it's anger. Anger is better than revelry. For though the face be sad, the heart be glad. I hear, the way I'm taking it is, better than being the jokester or thoughtless, that one should can be real, be real. You go to Israel, the society can be pretty hard edged, but people are real in every direction. And being real is
That's for sure. If you ever have had a really good Israeli friend, I used to, this woman that I was in a supervision group for, she was into reality. She would just tell it to you like it was, no matter who or what was around.
Yeah. There's sometimes it's too much, right?
Too much, right?
It can be too much, but there's also, it's refreshing too, to be
Her
real about
mother,
things.
her mother would always tell her, "You're not really a doctor. You only have a PhD in psychology. That doesn't count." I mean, that was a little too real for even.
That's a little
for
too
her.
real. But on the other hand, I Zichrono livracha, may his memory be for a blessing. But my grandfather, who did have a wonderful life in many ways and many accomplishments. He won an Emmy, which is kind of cool. But the last 30 years of his life, he had a stroke and he just suffered horribly. But he would tell me, at the end, before he completely, but still in his 90s, he would say to me, say, "Life is beautiful, kid." He liked to say that a lot. And I would think, really, you just spent the last 30 years suffering, that's really you're saying at the moment. And I appreciated his positivity. But I thought, this is, I'm not sure this is really what life has been like for you. And you lost your first wife young, and you had a lot of, your family was a mess for many years, your extended family and your brother. I mean, a lot of things. He didn't have an easy life, but I thought that's kind of that was his generation that he was taught, just say life is beautiful, but he covered up a lot with his life is beautiful. And I'm sure sometimes it would have been more helpful for him not to say life is beautiful, but to see what had been and be real about it.
May I ask
Sure.
a question about the translation in that verse 3?
Yep.
Because it's the way it is in our JPS. In the second, I'm speaking about the second colon, the second half of the verse. The way it is in the JPS, it's an opposition. The face may be sad, but the heart may be. Although the face is sad, the heart may be glad. And I see that Alter has it differently. And if you look at that Ki Varoa, he says, "For by a scowl, the heart is gladdened." So what do you think of that approach? Because it's about the key, I think, Varoa, but I'll your view of that.
I did see it, and I think Ibn Ezra translates it that way too. Both have been, and I'm not sure why the JPS. In some ways, the other one I like better, because it's the opposition here makes it harder to connect. I find, for though the face be glad, this heart be glad. Also, when you're sad, the heart is glad. That doesn't really connect. But I think it's better. Vexation is better than revelry, because with a face that's sad, the heart finds goodness, or just through the struggles, sometimes we come to understanding something more deeply, or we come, these are verses are hard to fully, it can go either way. Several of these in a row, because of the Hebrew is short and not adding the words that would fully allow us to be sure what they're exactly saying.
In this translation, it says, "Vexation is better than laughter, for with a stern countenance the heart will rejoice."
I like that. That's a really good translation. Well, a story I thought of telling was connecting to all these verses, really. Maybe even the other one about the levity of the fools, like the crackling of nettles, all these verses about being serious and not being frivolous. And there's a story the Baal Shem Tov would say, the founder of Hasidism, and about two men who go through a forest, a dark forest, and they come to the other side, and they meet a third man, and the third man looks at them and they both are bruised everywhere and totally obviously been through a horrible time. And one of them was drunk, and he asked the drunk one, well, like, what happened over there? And the drunk man says, oh, nothing, it was all fine, it was all great, I had a great trip through the forest, and here I am. And the other guy was saying, what are you talking about? We were attacked by robbers, and then we fell through the bramble, and then we couldn't see where we were going, and we got lost, and and here we are. And so the forest is life, and the person who is aware, who didn't go through a drunk, he's saying, hey, wait a second, that was not such an easy way through this forest. The other guy who was drunk was like, whatever, it was fine, it was all great, it's like, but he said, what are those bruises, and what's that, and what's that? How did that come to be? That's just part of what I think to say, and be real about what life is about. Life has the good moments for sure, but then there's the moments where you get bruised, and now you should spend your whole time thinking about how you got bruised. But let's be real about what's going on here. That's again that saying in the Talmud. Beit Hillel and Bet Shammai spent 3.5 years, arguing with each other. Would have been better the man had never been created. What a thing to discuss. But for 3.5 years, they discussed and argued, debated. Would have been better if man had never been created. At the end, Hillel said, even Hillel, who's ever the optimist, said, no, it would have been better if man would not been. Shammai was always the pessimist. No, would have been better if man had not been created. And Hillel says, you're right. It would have been better if man had not been created. But since we've been created anyway, let's try and make the best of it as though we have. And that's Hillel, the optimist. So not to focus on the depressing side, but to be real about it, and to then it's from that place that we find our joy, and from that place that we find our Jewish optimism, and from that place that we find blessing. And there's something to be said for holding those. Okay. Lev Chachamim, the heart of wise people are drawn to a house of mourning, and fools to a house of merrymaking. I think we've talked about that. It is better to listen to a wise man's reproof than to listen to the praise of fools. I'm going to connect my computer to the power because I see I'm losing battery. What do you make of that? It's better to listen to a wise man's reproof than to listen to the praise of fools.
There's a lot I think about this, but there's an Italian show I used to watch a few years ago on a streaming service I have, and they kind of brought up, they said, we can be, this woman was trying to be like the Americans, where, they just tell you the good things, you're doing a fantastic job, yada, yada, and all this other sort of stuff. And, from their philosophy, it was like that wasn't working because the person didn't excel. They didn't try harder because all they got was good feedback, even though they weren't really doing a very good job. And when they got honest feedback, then, they were able to improve. They wanted to improve. They just didn't realize they needed to improve in, what they were doing in the storyline. And from my perspective, I'd rather have somebody be really not cruel, but honest with me about something, so that I know where I stand. If I'm doing something wrong, I'd kind of like to know that I'm doing it wrong instead of somebody just telling me what I want to hear. And that kind of goes along with the whole flattery thing too, right? There's again, I'm kind of connecting some things. There's some other verse somewhere where it talks about, flattery, the vanity of flattery and so forth.
Well, and it's, as you were talking, I was thinking about, how many leaders have lost their way because they've been, praised by the people around them who just want to, keep them up, and the how often that happens, and they're not being told the truth, and they're being deceived. in the end, it doesn't lead them to a good place. Because better for someone, to have someone give you the reality is a gift, and because it's much easier to, just.
Well, it's like the controversy with kids with sports today, whereas one group feels like even if the kid is horrible, don't tell them, just give them a trophy, that everybody should get the trophy, not just the better team. So it's better to find out that you're not doing so well and help them improve or her improve rather than to just say, oh, you're all great.
But it's a fine line because you want to give encouragement and positivity, but it also makes it meaningless if everybody gets the same medal.
Right. Especially if you've lost 100-2 in basketball.
Well, and also it doesn't at some point do the individual any good because maybe this is not their thing and you keep them going down a path that is probably not where they should be going.
Right.
Yeah. Beautiful. Let's continue on. Interesting. So go ahead. So we have this image for the levity of the fools, like the crackling of nettles under a kettle, but that too is illusory. What's the crackling of nettles?
What's a nettle?
Like a stinging nettle?
Needles, isn't it? Pine
Needle,
hair.
like a leaf, a nettle or something, I don't know.
It's like a thorn, I think.
Thorn?
It's a coarse herb armed with stinging hairs.
But what would it be
It's a
doing
stinging
under a
nettle.
kettle? What would it be doing under, oh, I suppose in those days, if you cooked it outside.
You'd have to find something to cook it under, yeah.
No, that would make sense. Today, we wouldn't put a kettle under a nettle or on top of a nettle.
No. Well, if you were, let's say you were lighting your kettle. I mean, and the net, it's like something really crackly, it's crackling. So it's making a lot of noise, but it's not giving you a great fire, maybe, it's kind of it's making a lot of noise, but really it's just distracting and it's not really doing that much. It's just a lot of noise, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it has the sense of needling somebody, right? You stick them to annoy them.
That's true too.
For as the sound of the thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of the fool, and this too is vanity.
Yep. The laughter of the fool. Yeah. Well, again, same idea of thinking about, how we choose to be in the world and in our situations and our conversations and in our being. For cheating, yeah, for cheating may rob the wise man of reason and destroy the prudence of the cautious.
How can cheating rob the wise man of reason? What's he trying to get at with that?
Sexual?
What other what translations do you what other translations do you have?
This with the taunt. That's number 7, right? The taunt makes the wise foolish.
The
Verse.
maybe it's, let's talk about how easy we can be robbed of reason. I mean, it's riches. For riches, it can be for riches rob the wise man of reason, and destroy the prudence of the cautious. I mean, there are all kinds of ways to interpret that, but I in my mind, I was connecting it to the 2 verses before, or the verse before, and the flattery and the foolery, and flattery can rob you of your reason, and can destroy your prudence. You can be the wise person. How many, again, I'm going back to the leaders, but how many wise leaders and prudent leaders, eventually their inner circle flattering them ends up cheating them of the truth, and they end up falling because they haven't been seeing things as they, clearly, or they've been listening to the crackling of the nettles instead of, I don't know, the slow burning oak.
Rabbi, does it have anything to do with, like one's emotions? I mean, if, it seems like, cheating may be something that you would do on the spur of the moment. It's not, whereas, a wise man would think about it or be more reasoned, about what he does. But, the cheating and the whole idea of the fool, doing stuff would be more.
I see. It's connected to just the way, like the crackling of the nettles was kind of frivolous, and cheating is something that you do frivolously. You don't think about it. You just do it in the moment, and that can lead you down the wrong path so easily.
Yeah.
Nice. that's a really beautiful. That's a good way of looking at it. Phil, what do you have for the second half? What does Alter say for the second half?
We're in verse 7, right?
7. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. A bribe destroys the mind, and the oppression's profit drives the wise man wild, and a bribe destroys the mind. And I didn't raise that before because I was wanting to make sure I understood it better before I did, and he doesn't have a note. But the bribe is the matana, I guess.
The matana can also be a gift.
Right, a gift, basically, but in the wrong circumstances.
Very poetic,
yeah.
It's a very poetic. It's a poetic. Yeah. Many of these verses could have easily been in the book of Proverbs. They kind of have a ring to them, as if they were.
They really do.
Singular creations, but they're beautiful. Here we go. Okay, let's just move on. Time is running. So we have another tov. Here we go, another tov. Really, tov is maybe the most reoccurring word that we've found in this. But we have again what Diana was talking about earlier. Acharit, the end. The var, the end of a matter is better than the beginning of it. Better a patient spirit than a haughty spirit. Is this a turtle in the hair? A tortoise in the hair?
These are sort of aphoristic statements that he's making, small little aphorisms, and he's throwing them in at this particular time into his very questioning, very sort of deconstructive, destructive comments about life, and they all have to do with the kind of practical wisdom of leading your life, of a form of prudence that he's counseling. I'm not sure why he's pitching them in here, but maybe just as a relief, so to speak, as some kind of indication that he does have something to say about what a good life might be.
Thank you. I think it's a really good observation, and a really good question, which is this does feel different than what we've been reading. It's like suddenly he's throwing these kind of collection of proverbs at us, and some commentators will say, well, are these proverbs he wrote earlier in life, that he's now throwing at us in some other direction? And I like what you said, that it's maybe he's trying to show us, hey, I do have some kind of answer, but it feels a little bit dissonant. Something's not quite right, because it's, some of these don't quite work with some of his earlier statements, where he's going against wisdom earlier, but now suddenly he is for wisdom. He's less extreme, maybe more middle of the line here. He's more like his Proverbs self, if or more like the book of Proverbs. Probably some biblical scholars would say, well, is this an editor who brought this in?
Yeah.
But you have some, a comment I read about all of this is there's some contradictions with some of the earlier statements he made in Ecclesiastes, and it's one of the reasons that the rabbis weren't always sure whether to include this in the canon, because it's a little confusing. Something here is kind of, but the question is, what is it doing here? These are all statements that teach us a lot and that are interesting and that have something to say, but brought into the whole, it's a shift. Phil, go ahead. You're about to say something.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I guess I will say this. I won't go into any of the textual criticism, but you've alluded to it just now about whether, it says somebody had been fooling with this text to make it more pious by sprinkling things into it. But there is just a bibliographic note, maybe. The Anchor Bible translation and commentary, which I don't have handy here, they've actually done two. And the recent one, actually, it's 25 years ago now, by C.L. Seo, has Walter mentions him, but doesn't comment on this. He's got detailed statements of the proverb sources, arguable sources, and and beyond the book of Proverbs, other ancient texts. So anybody's really interested in that, you can find that and look at it. But I didn't want to retard progress by it. But there's a lot of material like that. But it does seem to see a real tension with the other material.
There's a lot of work that's been done in what the part of the Bible called the wisdom literature, to find other Near Eastern sources that have to find their similarities, and we know which one came first, who knows, but the book of Proverbs, and there's an Egyptian book that has a lot of similarities to it, and these kinds of sections do too. But I think we still should look at it as a whole, because even if there are several sources within, the editor still was an inspired person, obviously, and brought it all to us for a reason. So I think we can still have that conversation about the whole thing. And let's keep that question at the back and see if not this week, then next week we can continue to answer it. And let's go on. All right. The end of a matter, I just to think about it, better to be patient, right? Don't people come in guns blazing, but then what happens? They run out of ammunition, and better to be the one who's patient and who waits till the end, right? And when you wait till the end, when you're patient and you give life its due, and I think in professional situations you sometimes see it. Some people have a lot of bells and whistles, but then the bells and whistles run out, and but the other one who didn't have the bells and whistles, but who was a steady, powerful, creative worker, can bring a better value in the end, and in all kinds of situations. Then we have this verse here: don't let your spirit be quickly vexed, or don't let your spirit be angered, for anger abides in the breasts of fools. What do you think? Is it good never to be angry?
It's quickly angered.
Yeah. Well, doesn't this again deal with the idea of letting your emotions get the better of you?
Okay.
Rather than being more reserved or
or more patient.
Yeah. Anger, as we all know, anger leads us away from where we want to go too often, right? It takes us to it makes us say things and do things that we wish we hadn't, and that's just the nature of anger. And then you have to repair, and sometimes it's not so easy to do, and we lose sight of reality, right? Anger shields us from reality. Right? The Maggid of Mezrich, the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, says when you get not a little anger, but get a real anger, when you get angry, your soul leaves your body. And when your soul leaves your body, then anything can happen because it's only your lower nature that's suddenly working. So there we go. Again, the fool, though, be careful of the power of anger. I want to get to the next verse because we don't have much time unless somebody wants to talk about anger.
It strikes me that these verses are like a relief rally in the stock market. You know, we're looking at a bear market, everything is down, 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 and then all of a sudden there's some sort of bright, shiny spots, a little bit of a rally. I don't think we should take seriously this as being not, I think it's part of the thing. It's part of it, maybe his own method of being able to balance off what he's doing, but it's not his main message.
Yeah. Well, his every time you get back to this is all futile or it's illusionary, like, okay, thank God Kohelet's back now.
That's right.
My grandmother always said and passed down, never go to bed with a conflict.
My mother used to say that all the time too, Bonnie.
It was only women that said that.
I mean, she's talking about going to bed with your spouse.
No, I know.
Don't go to bed with a conflict.
Or if you're angry.
I think it's definitely a good way to good way to live. Doesn't always work.
Yeah, right.
It's the good, but it is, there's no way to live, right? It's no way to live. I mean, it's interesting because Kohelet, this whole time he's been telling us all the things are illusionary, but here he's giving us some, it feels a little bit like truisms, but he's giving us some kind of middle of the road. I don't mean that in a negative way, but a lot of these proverbs and wisdom literature and Greek wisdom, and it's all, it's the golden mean. It's kind of like living a good life, not letting yourself be too carried away, and but living a good, powerful, thoughtful life. And so it's sprinkled in there to maybe prepare us for what's next. The next one, let's continue on. Let's continue on. Because I'd like to get to at least verse 11 if we can in the few minutes remaining. Don't say, how has it happened? The former times are better than these, for it is not wise of you to ask that question, right? This is the golden age syndrome, right? It was always better in, back in the old golden age, whenever that golden age was, which is, this is not a statement that Judaism deals with easily, because Judaism is all about, the time of when we were in the desert with God was better, and we have this concept of the generations going down, where we're not as close to Sinai as we once were, and wherever at the end of the Torah service we say Chadesh Yameinu Kakedem, renew our days as of all, right? So on the other hand, right, the Jews in the desert were like, take me back to Egypt, and the garlic and the melon and the onion and the great old Egypt, right? Of course, so there is definitely wisdom there, and so for me, the question of this verse is not, is it saying you shouldn't say, don't take me back to the former days, or is it saying, don't ask, how has it happened that the former days were better? Don't ask that question. Is it that how has it happened that the day, or is it saying don't ask why were the golden days better? Live in the moment. Do what makes life good now. Don't be planted in the past. Because as much as you want to, those days and those decades are gone, and we're right now where we are. And look forward, not backwards. And
it also seems consistent with things that he said earlier, it's, I don't know if it was better, but, or, you know, it's better at the end of life than at the beginning of life.
Hmm.
And I think there were a couple of others where he was saying, you know, kind of early on may be good, but you can't go back there.
Yeah. Well, it's better to be where you are now, you know, because you only ever are where you are now. And you know, what was before is only a memory, and will never be what is now. So that seems like good advice, and to ask why were the former times better, maybe often does not lead to a great place. Let's look at this last verse. Wisdom is as good as patrimony, and even better for those who behold the sun. Oh, I'm so glad he brought back the sun. I
Yeah.
haven't heard about
Yeah,
that.
so it's better to be smart, or it's as good to be intelligent and wise as it is to get some inherited money or property or something.
Or yeches, yeah. Yeah, you know, the wisdom you develop is more useful to you than the inheritance you get.
Do you think that that translation is better than the literal one? And I think it's more literal in
With
well,
patrimony.
yeah,
With
that the
patrimony,
wisdom,
yeah.
that the better wisdom with a legacy, with the patrimony.
Mhm.
That is, it's the old joke, you know, you're better a kind word and a gun. You get more with a kind word and a gun, said Professor Erwin Corey, than just with a kind word. There's a kind of a practicality here.
Yeah.
I've lost the word. With the legacy, with the.
I actually like the other one better because I think that we've had so much comparison, and that's probably why with the new JPS they went in that translation. Wisdom is better. I mean, it is more often than not with, but it could also be a comparison. But it's again hard to know. What is it saying? The wisdom is as good as patrimony is inherited, or saying wisdom is good with patrimony, and even better for those who behold the sun. It's a good question, and a question that we'll leave right now as we'll gather our wisdom through the week and some sun, hopefully, and come back next week. Thank you, Diane, for joining us.
Bill,
and
Thank you.
and keep thinking about, you know, when is the real Kohelet going to come back again and give us a little shock and take us back into the edge of the cliff. Hopefully not too soon. Hopefully won't be waiting too long.
Phil, I wanted to thank you for quoting Professor Corey. You made my day.
I wouldn't have dared if I hadn't realized the time was gone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.